For a long, long time, schizophrenia has been one of the deepest mysteries in medicine. It's a condition that can change the very way someone experiences reality. But its biological roots, they've been incredibly hard to find. Well, today, we're going on a scientific investigation. We're going to try to crack that code using the amazing tools of modern genomics to finally shine a light on this profound human puzzle. So first, let's just get a sense of the scale here. Schizophrenia is not some rare, obscure disorder. It affects about 1% of the population over a lifetime. Let that sink in. That's millions of people, which means it touches pretty much all of us in some way. Through our families, our friends, our communities. It's a huge part of the human experience. And it is an incredibly complex condition. Just look at the symptoms. Clinically, they're often grouped into these three big buckets. You have what are called positive symptoms, not positive as in good, but positive as in things that are added to a person's experience, like hallucinations. Then you have negative symptoms, which are things that are taken away, like motivation or the ability to feel pleasure. And on top of that, you have cognitive symptoms, which mess with things like memory and the ability to think clearly. It's this incredible range that makes it such a tough nut to crack. Okay, so here's our game plan for this investigation. We're going to start with the main puzzle. Then we'll follow this trail of genetic clues. And that trail is going to lead us deep into the brain's wiring and even change how we think about the disorder's timeline. We'll even get to solve a huge evolutionary paradox before we see what this all means for the future of treatment. It's going to be quite a journey. So our investigation really kicks off with this central paradox. For more than 100 years, we've known that schizophrenia is highly heritable. It clearly runs in families. But even with that strong genetic signal, the actual biological cause, it's been one of the biggest black boxes in all of medicine. Until now. So what changed? Where did the breakthrough finally come from? The answer, in a word, is genomics. For the first time, we could actually read the human genetic blueprint at a massive scale. And once scientists did that, they finally found the key to unlock this mystery. And what they found, well, it was astonishing. The first thing they discovered just completely rewrote the rules. It turns out there is no single schizophrenia gene. Forget that idea. Instead, the risk is what we call highly polygenic. The best way to think about it is, it's not like a single light switch that's either on or off. It's more like thousands and thousands of tiny little dimmer switches. Each one just nudges the risk up or down by a teeny tiny amount. But when you add them all up, they have a really significant effect. And right away, the first huge clue popped out when researchers started comparing the genetic data. They found this massive overlap with bipolar disorder, a genetic correlation of around 0.7. That is incredibly high in genetics. It basically tells us that these two conditions, which we've always treated as completely separate things, actually share some really deep biological roots. But that wasn't the only connection. The plot thickened. The genetic data also showed a shared risk with a totally different group of conditions, childhood neurodevelopmental disorders, or NDDs. We're talking about things like autism, ADHD, and intellectual disability. This second clue started pointing the investigation in a brand new direction, back in time, to the earliest stages of brain development. So why is this so important? Well, what genomics is really doing is forcing us to question the very lines we draw between these conditions. If schizophrenia shares genetic roots with both bipolar disorder and autism, it strongly suggests that our diagnostic manuals, our neat little boxes, might not be capturing the biological reality. The biology, it seems, is way more tangled up than we ever thought. Okay, so these genetic clues are powerful, for sure. But they bring up a whole new question. If you've got thousands of genes involved, scattered all over the place, where in the brain is the problem actually happening? Is it in one specific spot? Or is it something more fundamental? This quote from researcher Michael J. Owen just nails the shift in thinking. The genetic evidence isn't pointing to a problem in one little corner of the brain. No, it's pointing to a fundamental disturbance in how neurons talk to each other at the level of the synapse, and it's happening across the entire brain. For decades, the search was all about localization. Researchers were hunting for that one faulty brain region. Maybe it was the prefrontal cortex, maybe the hippocampus. The thinking was, if we could just find the spot, we could find the cause. But the new view, the one we have thanks to genomics, is so much bigger. It suggests schizophrenia is a disorder of the synapse itself, that tiny, crucial gap where neurons pass signals to one another. So it's not a problem with one neighborhood in the brain, it's a problem with the fundamental communication infrastructure of the entire city. And that makes sense, right? A problem that basic would naturally have widespread effects on everything from our thoughts to our perceptions. All right, so we've got a what, it's a disorder of the synapse, and we have a where, it's widespread across the brain. But this leads us to the next critical question in our investigation. When? When does this all actually begin? And the answer? Well, it completely rewrites the timeline of this disorder. This is what's called the neurodevelopmental hypothesis. The story starts way, way earlier than we thought. Those genetic risk factors, many of which are shared with conditions like autism, they're there from birth, shaping how the brain gets built during childhood. But then comes adolescence, this incredibly dynamic period when the brain goes through a massive reorganization. One key process is called synaptic pruning, where the brain kind of cleans house and fine-tunes its connections. The idea is that in people with a high genetic risk, this pruning process might go a little haywire, which then sets the stage for psychosis to emerge in early adulthood. So even though the most severe symptoms appear late, the seeds were planted decades before. Now, we've come to a really fascinating part of this story. For years, schizophrenia has been at the center of this profound evolutionary paradox, a puzzle that just seemed to defy the basic logic of natural selection. But now, with our new genomic toolkit, we can finally put forward a solution. So here's the paradox, plain and simple. Schizophrenia is highly heritable, we know that. But on average, people with the condition have fewer children. Now, from a strictly evolutionary point of view, any gene that makes you less likely to reproduce should be strongly selected against and should eventually just fade away. So the question is, why hasn't it? Why, after thousands of years, does it still exist in about 1% of the population? The most likely answer, it turns out, is something called mutation-selection balance. So it's not that these genes are secretly providing some kind of hidden evolutionary advantage. The real story is a bit more like a delicate balancing act. On one hand, natural selection is slowly weeding out some of these risk variants because they reduce reproduction. But at the exact same time, new mutations that contribute to the risk are constantly popping up in the population. The condition persists not because of some hidden benefit, but because it's caught in a stalemate between new mutations coming in and old ones going out. Okay, so with these core mysteries basically solved, we can finally turn to the most important question of all. So what? What does all this actually mean for people? How is this new, gene-based understanding of schizophrenia changing the hunt for better treatments? You know, for more than 50 years, pretty much every single antipsychotic drug has targeted just one system in the brain, dopamine. But our genomic insights have just blown the doors wide open. We now know that the synapse is way more complicated than that. And this has led to a whole new wave of potential treatments that target completely different systems, like muscarinic and glutamate receptors. In fact, brand new drugs are being developed and approved right now that hit M1 and M4 receptors, a totally new approach that came directly out of this deeper biological understanding. So let's just pull back and recap the huge paradigm shift we've just walked through. We have moved from the simple, kind of localized model to a much richer, much more accurate picture. Schizophrenia is a highly polygenic neurodevelopmental condition that is fundamentally rooted in the way our synapses work. And this isn't just a new theory, it's a whole new foundation for all the research and treatment that's going to come next. And that leaves us with one last big, provocative thought. We started this journey by seeing how genomics blurred the lines between schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and autism. As this biological understanding gets deeper and deeper, it really forces us to ask a huge question. Will we one day move beyond our current diagnostic labels altogether? Could we end up defining and treating these conditions based not on their symptoms, but on their underlying genetic and synaptic profiles? The code has been cracked, and it might just end up rewriting the entire book on mental health.